Barack Obama walked into the Oval Office entirely unaware that Donald Trump and JD Vance were about to spring a devastating trap, exposing a shadow economy where someone bills you $600 an hour to be a companion. You pull yourself out of bed before the sun rises to work a brutal shift, breaking your back to pay your mortgage while the system drains your paycheck. But what if I told you that while you struggle to make an honest living, someone else gets paid $600 an hour to do absolutely nothing? I do not mean a brain surgeon saving lives inside a high-pressure operating room. I do not mean a top-tier engineer designing the next generation of spaceflight. I mean someone literally billing your government, billing you $600 an hour to act as a companion for an undocumented immigrant. Let that reality sink in for a second. You skip family dinners to work overtime, while the bureaucrats in Washington take the sweat off your brow and hand it over to phantoms. They pay out your money to people to cook, to clean, and to be a friend to someone who broke the law to enter this country in the first place. $600 an hour to be a butler. It functions as a sick joke, but the punchline targets your bank account. This stands as no isolated mistake. This represents no clerical error hidden inside some dusty IRS basement where someone misplaced a decimal point. This operates by deliberate design. In just one state, inside one single Medicaid home health building in Ohio, investigative reporters uncovered 94 different companies operating under one roof. 94 companies. All of them billing the American taxpayer. All of them raking in a staggering $66 million. $66 million of your money vanished into the ether to pay for free butlers and imaginary services. The architects who built this system, the politicians who smile at you on television and lecture you regarding compassion and equity, possess intelligence. They know exactly what they execute. They fund a shadow economy of massive fraud, utilizing your hard-earned dollars as their personal slush fund, while they look down their noses at you for complaining about grocery prices. They sold out the American citizen. They betrayed you, and they assumed they would escape accountability forever. They assumed you were too tired, too distracted, and too powerless to ever demand an accounting. They believed no one would ever possess the spine to kick down the doors, turn on the lights, and stop the money. But eras end. Sometimes the truth comes knocking, and it refuses to wipe its feet. Tonight, the bill comes due, and the reckoning happens right inside the belly of the beast. Right now, the streets of Washington, D.C. bathe in the frantic red and blue lights of police cruisers. Sirens wail down Independence Avenue, echoing off the marble monuments. Just a mile away from the White House, near the National Mall at 15th Street, a severe security confrontation just took place. A Secret Service officer engaged an armed threat. The Metropolitan Police Department immediately dropped a suffocating lockdown over the entire perimeter. Roads closed. Authorities pushed people off the lawns and locked them inside secure buildings. Nobody gets in. Nobody gets out. The mainstream media spins their wheels outside, struggling to decipher the street-level chaos. But inside the highly secure walls of the White House, the real earthquake strikes. Inside the Oval Office, the air turns thick enough to choke on. The heavy soundproof oak door seals shut. Beyond the reinforced bulletproof glass, the city chaos rages. Inside, only a deafening, terrifying silence remains. Sitting behind the resolute desk is the President of the United States. Donald Trump does not smile. His posture remains rigid, his hands folded neatly over a massive, unredacted file bearing the official seal of the Department of War on Fraud Task Force. Across from him, sinking slightly into the fabric of a pristine historic sofa, sits a man used to being the smartest guy in the room. Barack Obama looks at his watch. He adjusts the cuffs of his flawlessly tailored suit, a gesture of feigned boredom masking a real, sudden spike of adrenaline. He clears his throat, breaking the heavy silence. This is highly irregular, Donald. I was scheduled to be near the East Room, not held in an interrogation. Whatever security situation happens out there on 15th Street, I am certain the Secret Service has it under control. There is zero reason for me to be held in this room. Trump does not blink. He leans forward, the leather of his executive chair creaking under his weight. His eyes lock onto his predecessor. Nobody is holding you here, Barack. You are a guest, and frankly, with the conflict out there right now, this remains the safest place on earth for you to be. We would not want anything to happen to the spiritual leader of the Democrat Party. Obama stiffens. The sarcastic emphasis on the word leader hits the exact targeted nerve. I am retired from politics. I am a private citizen. Whatever political theater you orchestrate tonight, leave me out of it. Your administration's aggressive posture clearly stirs up unrest in the streets. You created a powder keg. Trump shakes his head, an expression of cutting pity crossing his face. A powder keg? You think the sirens outside represent the problem? Trump picks up a single sheet of paper from the top of the thick file and lets it flutter back down to the polished wood. The real damage is what you and your people executed against the American working class. Obama sighs, looking toward the ornate ceiling, as if seeking patience from a higher power. We saved the economy. We built a healthcare infrastructure driven by compassion. Compassion. You call it compassion. I call it the biggest heist in the history of the world. Trump stands up, his imposing figure casting a long, dark shadow across the Oval Office carpet, dwarfing the man on the sofa. While you delivered beautiful speeches regarding hope and change, your precious system cut checks for $66 million to phantom companies in Ohio. Obama's eyes narrow, his mask of indifference slipping a fraction. I have no idea what local Medicaid irregularities you blame me for. Oh, you know exactly what I am talking about. $600 an hour to cook and clean for undocumented immigrants. $600 an hour. And you billed it to the American taxpayer. The guy working his fingers to the bone just to afford food for his family's table. The trademark smoothness vanishes from Obama's face. You conflate isolated incidents of fraud with a systemic effort to help the vulnerable. There is nothing isolated about it. Near the corner of the room, Vice President JD Vance steps into the light. He holds a thick binder. His expression stays cold, calculating, relentless. It is not a bug in your system, Mr. President. It is the system. Obama stares at the binder, then slowly looks up at Vance. The terrifying realization dawns on him that this lockdown represents no random delay. This is a trap. The sun begins setting over the Potomac, casting long streaks of orange and deep purple across the Washington skyline. Normally, this hour signals the swamp creatures of D.C. slipping out of their marble fortresses. They head to exclusive steakhouses, order $300, bottles of wine, and laugh about manipulating the working class. But tonight, nobody drinks wine. Tonight, the swamp suffocates under the deafening, high-pitched scream of emergency sirens. The wail echoes off the Washington Monument, vibrating through the thick, bullet-resistant glass of the Oval Office. Outside, chaos descends with the speed of a guillotine. A security confrontation erupted at the intersection of 15th Street and Independence Avenue. The Secret Service engaged an armed threat right across from the National Mall. It sits just a mile away, but in the hyper-secure bubble of the Capitol, a mile equals the front porch. The order dropped: instantly clear the lawn, push everyone into a secure building, lock the perimeter down tight. No movement, no exceptions. The Metropolitan Police Department threw up barricades, closing the surrounding roads, choking off all access. Inside the Oval Office, the atmosphere weighs heavier than lead. The flashing red and blue lights of the parked motorcade vehicles slice through the gathering dusk, rhythmically illuminating the historic room in harsh, unforgiving strokes of color. Behind the resolute desk sits Donald Trump. He is supposed to be in the East Room right now, preparing to deliver a speech at a small business summit. Instead, he remains entirely motionless. He does not pace. He does not check his phone. He sits there with the unnerving stillness of an apex predator cornering its prey. On the elegant historic sofa just feet away, Barack Obama unravels, a subtle unraveling, masked by years of media training and elite conditioning, but it is visible. His leg bounces up and down, his hands grip together tightly, the knuckles turning white. He shoots nervous glances toward the heavy oak door. He is a man used to maintaining total control of his environment, a man who dictates the terms of engagement. But right now, the terms are dictated for him by Secret Service protocol, and worse, by the man sitting behind the desk. Obama stands up, the movement betraying his internal panic. He walks toward the reinforced windows, carefully standing at an angle to avoid presenting a target, peering out at the sea of flashing lights. This is unacceptable. The protocols for a former president are clear. In the event of an active threat near the perimeter, I am to be immediately evacuated to a secure bunker. He turns around, glaring at Trump. Why hasn't my detail moved me? Have you countermanded their orders? Trump leans back in his large leather chair, steepling his fingers together, his eyes never leaving Obama. Nobody countermanded anything, Barack. The protocol is a hard lockdown. You know how this works better than anyone. You stay where you are until the threat is neutralized. Trump gestures lazily toward the window. And frankly, where could you possibly be safer than right here with me? The irony hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. Obama hates it. He paces across the carpet, the mask of the detached intellectual slipping further away. This is exactly what I warned about. Look at the streets outside. Look at the Capitol. He points a long finger toward the window. You created an environment of perpetual chaos. You stoked the flames of division until the whole country burns. Obama takes a step closer to the desk, trying to reclaim some semblance of authority. Just a week ago, there was a severe incident. Now there are security alerts on Independence Avenue. The security situation around you gets real very fast. Obama leans over the edge of the resolute desk. You turned this city, this nation, into a powder keg. You thrive on this. You encourage it because it distracts people from what is really going on. The narrator steps in here, cutting through the political theater. Do you hear that? Do you hear the breathtaking arrogance? The man whose administration oversaw the hollowing out of the American middle-class lectures about a powder keg, the man whose party cheered as cities burned in the name of social justice, suddenly acts terrified of a little noise outside the gates. They always project their own sins onto their opponents. They create the disaster, and then they blame you for pointing it out. Trump does not rise to the bait. He does not yell. He does not get defensive. He simply watches Obama with a look of profound, calculating amusement. Violence. He shakes his head, an almost pitying smile crossing his face. You think the sound of a Secret Service agent doing his job is violence? Trump leans forward, resting his forearms on the desk, instantly shrinking the distance between them. The entire energy of the room shifts, gravity pulling toward the man in the chair. This is not chaos, Barack. This is the truth, knocking at the door. Obama stares at him, momentarily caught off guard by the sheer weight of the statement. What does that even mean? It means the facade is crumbling. It means the people outside this building are finally waking up to the reality of what you and Joe Biden did to them. Trump picks up a pen and points it toward the heavy oak doors. Those agents out there, They just took down a threat. They neutralized a danger. Trump tosses the pen back onto the desk. But the real threats to this country did not come armed with weapons. They came armed with policy papers. Obama scoffs. A nervous, dismissive sound. More populist rhetoric. More imaginary enemies to justify your authoritarian grip. Imaginary? There is nothing imaginary about the destruction of the American working class. Trump stands up, pacing slowly behind the desk, turning the Oval Office into a courtroom where he acts as both prosecutor and judge. You want to talk about damage? Let's talk about the damage of a system that steals a man's livelihood and hands it to a foreign-born worker. Let's talk about inflating the currency until a mother cannot afford to feed her children. Let's talk about funding a shadow government filled with bureaucrats who despise the very citizens who pay their salaries. Obama shakes his head, trying to retreat into standard talking points. We expanded health care. We built a safety net. We protected the vulnerable. You built a trough. You built a massive, bloated trough for your cronies to feed from. And you disguised it as charity. The sirens outside wail louder, a chaotic soundtrack to the dismantling of a political legacy. Obama glances back at the door, desperation flashing in his eyes. He understands now. The lockdown operates not just as a physical barrier keeping danger out. It operates as a psychological cage, keeping him in. There are no cameras here. There are no adoring journalists waiting to polish his answers and edit out his hesitations. There is only the raw, unvarnished reality of the damage his ideology caused, and the man elected to tear that ideology down to its foundations. Let me out of here. Call the Secret Service director. Have my detail extract me immediately. They are a little busy right now. The area is secure, but the Metropolitan Police say the surrounding roads remain closed for several hours while they continue their investigation. Trump sits back down, leaning deep into the leather chair. Several hours, Barack. Trump smiles, a predator appreciating the inescapable nature of the trap, which means you and I have plenty of time to review the receipts. The narrator steps back in, the voice sharp and unforgiving. And just like that, the architect of the swamp realizes he cannot run. For 8 years, he danced away from accountability. For years after that, he pulled the strings of a puppet administration from the shadows, watching the country bleed out while he attended celebrity galas. He thought he remained untouchable. He thought the system he built was too big, too complex, and too deeply entrenched to ever face dismantling. But he forgot one crucial detail. The American people do not surrender. They send a bulldozer into the swamp, and right now, that bulldozer is parked directly in front of him, blocking the only exit. The lockdown seals the doors. The trap is sprung, and the real interrogation begins. The heavy thud of JD Vance's binder hitting the glass table does not just break the silence in the Oval Office, it breaks the illusion. For the last 10 minutes, Barack Obama played the role of the inconvenienced statesman, the elder statesman enduring a tedious interruption. But when that binder hits the glass, the kinetic energy in the room shifts completely. Outside the reinforced windows, the frantic sweeping beams of police cruisers cut through the Washington dusk. Flashes of harsh red and blinding blue light rake across the interior of the Oval Office, washing over the historic portraits and thick carpets. The light catches Obama's face in rhythmic, unforgiving intervals. In the brief flashes of illumination, you see it. The media will never show you this angle, but in the raw, unscripted reality of this locked room, the truth is written all over his features. He looks exhausted. He looks like a man carrying a massive, crumbling structure on his shoulders for far too long, and his knees finally start buckling. Donald Trump notices it immediately. Trump does not lunge for the binder. He does not start screaming numbers or demanding confessions right away. He is a builder. He knows that before you demolish a structure, you find the structural stress points, you find the cracks in the foundation, and you apply pressure. Trump leans back in the leather executive chair, steepling his fingers, his eyes tracing the lines of fatigue around Obama's eyes. "You look tired, Barack. You look like a man who hasn't had a good night's sleep since you left this building." Obama stiffens, his spine snapping straight, as he tries to summon the old magic, the effortless cool the press corps used to fawn over. "I sleep perfectly fine, Donald. I am simply exhausted by the constant state of emergency you thrive in, the theatrics, the chaos." Trump shakes his head slowly, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "It is not me keeping you awake. And it is certainly not the sirens outside." Trump leans forward, resting his forearms on the resolute desk. "It is them. Your own people." Obama blinks, a micro-expression of confusion crossing his face before he masks it with a scoff. "My people? Your party? The Democrat Party? Or what remains of it?" Trump points a finger across the room, not at Obama, but at the empty space beside him, pointing to ghosts. "You bragged about it recently, didn't you? In that interview with the New Yorker, you actually bragged that no other ex-president acts as the main party surrogate for 4 election cycles after leaving office." Obama lifts his chin, a reflexive posture of pride. It is called duty. When the country faces an existential threat from radical populism, leaders do not get to walk away. The narrator steps in here, the voice dripping with pure, unadulterated cynicism. Duty. Existential threat. Radical populism. They always wrap their power grabs in the holy language of salvation. They want you to believe they step out of their mansions and come down from Martha's Vineyard as a noble sacrifice for the peasant class. But Trump knows the translation. He knows what those words actually mean in the dark, desperate back rooms of the Democrat establishment. You try to spin it as a good sign. You try to make it sound like a badge of honor. Trump lets out a short, harsh laugh. "It is not a badge of honor, Barack. It is a distress signal." Obama's jaw clench, the muscles ticking visibly under his skin. "They keep pulling you back in. They keep dragging you out onto the stage, making you read from the teleprompter, making you dance for the cameras, because right now, there is no leadership in the Democrat Party." Trump pauses, letting the silence amplify the devastating truth of his words. They have nobody. They have a vacuum. So, they look to you, a ghost of their past, to save them from the reality of the present. Obama stands up, unable to remain seated under the weight of the psychological assault. He paces a few steps, his silhouette flashing red and blue against the window panes. "I am protecting a legacy. I am protecting the institutions of our democracy that you actively try to dismantle. Someone must stand between this country and your absolute disregard for the rule of law." Obama points a finger at the resolute desk. "My presence is required because the stakes have never been higher. If that means I must remain in the arena, then I remain in the arena." Trump watches him pace, entirely unmoved by the soaring rhetoric. He looks at Vance, standing quietly in the shadows, before returning his gaze to the former president. "The arena. That is a beautiful speech, Barack. Truly. The media would love it. They would print it on the front page of the Times tomorrow." Trump's expression hardens, the amusement vanishing, replaced by cold, lethal seriousness. "But we both know that is not what you tell Michelle when you walk through the front door." The name hangs in the air like a live grenade. Obama stops pacing dead in his tracks. The color drains from his face. The flashing police lights illuminate a man who realizes his most heavily guarded fortress is breached. "Keep my wife out of this. I am not the one bringing her into it. You are. You let your political headache become a problem at home. Trump picks up a pen and taps it rhythmically against the wooden desk. Each tap drives a nail into the psychological coffin. You think we don't know? You think the people inside your own circle don't talk? Trump leans forward. We know my return to the White House creates genuine tension in your marriage. Obama stares at him, paralyzed, stripped of his talking points. Michelle wants you to finally step back. She wants you to enjoy life. Stop living in this permanent campaign mode. You are no longer the president, Barack. Let the Democrat Party work it out. Isn't that what she says? The narrator interjects, analyzing the final blow. This represents the reality the elites hide from you, while they demand you sacrifice your paycheck, your security, and your children's futures for their grand globalist visions. Their own lives fall apart behind closed doors. They are slaves to the machine they built. Obama is done with the Democrat Party. He is done acting as the leader of a sinking ship. And he desperately wants to walk away. But he cannot. The swamp will not let him. She issued a clear plea. She told you to step away from the spotlight so you two can enjoy your later years together. Trump stops tapping the pen. He points it directly at Obama's chest. But you told her you cannot just walk away while I am in power. Trump lets out a dry, humorless chuckle. You stand on the verge of sacrificing your marriage for the Democrat Party. Trump shakes his head, a look of genuine, withering disdain crossing his features. You should never do that, Barack, especially not for the Democrat Party. Obama remains silent, the master orator, the man who built an entire career on the power of his words, has absolutely nothing to say. His breathing turns shallow. His eyes fix on the carpet. The psychological armor strips away, leaving behind a tired, defeated man who realizes his opponent sees every single weakness. He is beaten before the debate on policy even begins. From the shadows, JD Vance takes a step forward. The psychological preparation is complete. The target is softened, the foundation cracked. Now, it is time to drop the hammer. Vance reaches out and places his hand flat on the thick binder, resting on the glass table. The president is right, Barack. You sacrificed everything to protect a party that morphed into a criminal enterprise. Vance taps the cover of the binder. And tonight, we look at exactly what you gave up your peace of mind to defend. The narrator steps out from behind the curtain. Look at the contrast in this room. On one side, you have the Ivy League elite, the polished darling of the media class who never had a callus on his hands. On the other side, you have a guy from Middletown, Ohio, who knows exactly what it looks like when a factory closes and a town bleeds to death. JD Vance is not here to debate political philosophy. He is not here to engage in a polite academic seminar about the theoretical benefits of the welfare state. President Trump tapped him to lead the Department of War on Fraud Task Force for one specific reason. He is here to be a hunter. He is here to take a sledgehammer to the bureaucratic parasites feeding on the American middle class. Vance stands over the glass coffee table, his hand resting heavily on the thick black binder. The flashing police lights from the street catch the metallic rings of the folder, giving it the appearance of a weapon. Let's talk about compassion, Barack. Since that is the word your party loves to hide behind. Obama shifts uncomfortably on the historic sofa, adjusting his tie, trying to project an air of bored superiority. I have no interest in engaging in a partisan witch hunt. Medicaid operates as a lifeline for tens of millions of vulnerable Americans. It forms the bedrock of a civilized society. A civilized society. Vance flips the heavy binder open. The sound of the thick pages turning echoes loudly in the tense silence of the Oval Office. Let me show you what your civilized society looks like on paper. Vance pulls out a glossy photograph and slides it across the glass table toward Obama. It displays a picture of a nondescript, unremarkable building. Investigative reporter Luke Rosiak found this gem. It is a single Medicaid home health building in Ohio. Obama barely glances at the photo, keeping his chin elevated. I am not familiar with every local zoning dispute in the Midwest. JD, it is not a zoning dispute. It is a crime scene. Vance pulls a sprawling spreadsheet from the binder and drops it next to the photograph. This single building allegedly houses 94 different companies. Trump leans forward in his chair, behind the resolute desk, watching the dismantling of his predecessor with absolute, unwavering focus. 94 companies. Vance leans down, placing his hands on the edge of the table, closing the physical distance between him and the former president, all of them billing the American taxpayers. And they rake in a staggering $66 million. Obama's eyes finally drop to the spreadsheet. Tracking the endless columns of red ink, he quickly attempts to construct a defense, relying on the classic left-wing playbook of bureaucratic obfuscation. Healthcare administration is complex. Consolidation of billing services in one location is a standard practice to reduce overhead. You attempt to criminalize administrative efficiency. These funds provide critical care to marginalized communities. Vance laughs. It is not a joyful sound. It is a harsh, biting sound that strips the paint off the walls of the Oval Office. Critical care? Vance pulls out another document, highlighting lines of text with a bright yellow marker. We are not talking about ICU care, Barack. We are not talking about a hospital. Vance shoves the paper directly in front of Obama. These outfits bill Medicaid, and they literally describe it as acting as a butler for immigrants. The word butler echoes through the room, shattering the illusion of humanitarian aid. A butler. Obama's jaw tightens. That is a gross mischaracterization of personal care services. Providing assistance with daily living to vulnerable populations represents community support. It represents the bare minimum of human decency. Decency? You want to talk about decency? Let me tell you what they actually do. Vance starts listing the items on the invoices. They cook for them, and then bill Medicaid. They clean their houses, and then bill Medicaid. They act as a companion and a friend, and then bill Medicaid. The narrator steps in, lowering the tone to a deadly serious whisper. Do you hear that, America? While you set your alarm for the crack of dawn, while you skip family vacations, your government forces you to pay for someone else to have a taxpayer-funded maid. But it gets worse. It always gets worse when the radical left spends your money. Vance stands up straight, looking down at Obama with absolute contempt. And who are these people they serve? Barack, they are undocumented immigrants, people who broke our laws, crossed our borders, and immediately plugged into a machine that drains the lifeblood out of the American working class. Obama shakes his head, attempting to deploy the ultimate shield of the political elite. Everyone in this country deserves basic human dignity, regardless of their documentation status. Dignity is earned, and it is certainly not bought at the expense of the people who actually built this nation. Vance reaches into the binder one last time, pulling out a single, heavily highlighted invoice. You want to know the price tag of your compassion, Barack? Vance holds the piece of paper up in the dim light of the Oval Office. We are not talking about billing at $20 to $40 an hour. Vance pauses, making sure everyone in the room hears the next sentence. Some of these outfits bill upwards of $600 an hour to cook or clean for an undocumented immigrant that needs a friend. $600 an hour. The number drops like a nuclear bomb in the center of the room. Trump lets out a low whistle of pure disgust. Obama is silent. Even the most silver-tongued orator in the history of the Democrat Party cannot spend $600 an hour for a taxpayer-funded friend. The narrator steps back in, directly addressing the hard-working American. You and I, we work too hard. It is harder than ever to make money, to save money, to afford bills, and to put food on the table. You play by the rules of a rigged game, and then you find out somebody came here illegally and they now bill the government $600 an hour to cook, clean, and befriend an undocumented immigrant. It is not just fraud. It is a direct insult to your existence. It is a slap in the face to every blue-collar worker, every waitress, every truck driver who ever paid a dime in taxes. You can do that for free on a closed border, otherwise leave. Vance looks over at Trump, who nods slowly in approval. These allegations are absolutely shocking, and this is exactly why the president tapped me to lead this task force. Vance slams the binder shut. The sharp crack sounds like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. For years, our government just accepted it. An invoice came in. They paid out the money. But we refuse to accept it anymore. Vance crosses his arms, looking like a heavily armed guard standing over the U.S. Treasury. I am directing the task force to launch an immediate investigation. We will prosecute any fraudsters involved. Vance leans in, delivering the final devastating blow to the legacy of the left. And we are shutting off the money spigot immediately. No more payments for these fraudsters. Obama sits frozen on the sofa. The flashing police lights outside offer no rescue, only a continuous, silent alarm of his own political demise. The compassion was always fake. The moral high ground was always an illusion. And tonight, the American worker finally possesses a champion who is not afraid to say it out loud. They never want you to see how the sausage is made. The political elites, the bureaucrats, the media talking heads, they love to sell you the finished product. They wrap it in glossy packaging, label it with focus group tested words like compassion, equity, and care. They stand at their podiums and demand you hand over more of your paycheck to fund it. But they pray every single day that you never actually look inside the factory. Because if you did, if you saw the grotesque, rotting machinery of the Washington establishment, you would never give them another dime. You would burn the factory to the ground. Tonight, inside the Oval Office, Donald Trump and JD Vance turn on the factory lights. Vance reaches for a sleek black remote on the edge of the resolute desk and presses a button. On the far wall of the Oval Office, a massive high-definition monitor springs to life. The sudden burst of cold blue light washes over the room, overpowering the frantic red and blue flashes from the police cruisers still locked down out on the street. The screen displays a staggering, incredibly complex digital web. It looks like the organizational chart of an international cartel. Hundreds of red lines connect dozens of different names, addresses, and corporate entities, all funneling back to a few central hubs. You want to know what the root cause of this problem is, Barack? Nobody paid attention. Vance points the remote at the screen, zooming in on a massive cluster of red dots on the West Coast. Let me put the numbers out there so everyone is perfectly clear. 1 in 3 hospices in America are located in Los Angeles. Vance pauses, letting the absurdity of the statistic hang in the air. Not California. L.A. 1 in 3. Obama stares at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his eyes, but he remains completely silent. I mean, how many people die there? Obviously, it is fraudulent. It is out of control, rabid fraud. Trump leans forward on his elbows, staring down the former president. They built a gold rush out of fake death. And your administration, your regulators, they just rubber-stamped the paperwork. Obama finally clears his throat, attempting to summon the ghost of his former authority. The Department of Health and Human Services processes millions of claims a day. It is a decentralized system. You cannot hold the executive branch responsible for every bad actor in Los Angeles. Oh, they are not just bad actors. Vance clicks the remote again. The screen shifts, displaying the face of an elderly man in a white medical coat. This is Dr. Stephen Pine, an 2-year-old OBGYN. Vance looks at Obama with total disgust. They basically sell their license number to open multiple hospice relationships. They dishonestly claim people are dying when they are not. Vance taps the screen with his knuckle, right on Dr. Pine's digital photograph. Let's look at a little outfit called Graceful Care Hospice, located 200 miles away near Los Angeles. They enrolled a few dozen patients, but their claims skyrocketed. They billed Medicare $1.3 million for 109 patients, all on claims submitted by Dr. Stephen Pine. Vance clicks the remote one more time, and the web expands massively, covering the entire screen in a chaotic tangle of red lines. And he didn't stop there. Federal records show 17 hospices associated with Dr. Pine. They filed more than 3,000 claims for 900 patients, billing Medicare for $16 million. Vance throws his hands up in sheer disbelief. $16 million. Anything over 100 patients at a given time that you have responsibility for as a hospice physician should start to raise red flags. But 17 different hospices using your NPI number? Your regulators didn't see a red flag, Barack. They didn't see anything at all, because they did not care. The narrator steps back in, bringing the audience right to the heart of the betrayal. Do you hear those numbers? $16 million handed over to one single doctor's network for patients he likely never even saw. When reporters tried to reach this guy, he initially claimed not to know graceful care. He denied wrongdoing, saying he believed some hospices used his provider number without permission. But his name sat right there on the prescriptions. And who pays for this? You do. But it is not just about the money. If they steal your money, they steal your life. They do not care at all about you. Let me take you out of the Oval Office for just a second. Let me take you to the Central Valley of California, where the real victims of this radical left-wing negligence sit in their living rooms. Meet Trini and Enrique. They are an elderly couple just trying to live out their golden years in peace. They thought they received basic medical assistance. An employee visited them and proceeded to sign Trini and her husband up for hospice, but never disclosed to her that it was hospice. Can you imagine the pure evil required to execute that? To look a perfectly healthy elderly couple in the eye and secretly classify them as terminally ill, just to drain the government's bank account? The company, Graceful Care, claimed they did nothing wrong. But the receipts tell a completely different story. Reporters found the receipts: a hospital bed, an oxygen table, a wheelchair, and dozens of more supplies, all stamped with the name Graceful Care. They brought the patient on access, billed the patient's hospice benefit, and then did not provide hospice services. According to Medicare rules, you must have an RN visit once every 14 days. That did not happen. Trini and Enrique only saw a visit by a nurse for 15 minutes. Twice. 2 1-5-minute visits. While the scammers billed the taxpayers for hospital beds and oxygen tanks that sat gathering dust. When asked about it, Trini, heartbroken and humiliated, said exactly what every American feels when they look at this broken system. She said, "The way I see it, we were just taken in, deceived, lied to, exploited, used as human poker chips in a massive taxpayer-funded casino where the house never loses and the working class always foots the bill." Back in the Oval Office, the silence following Vance's presentation proves deafening. The massive screen casts a harsh, unforgiving glow on Barack Obama's face. He cannot look at the screen. He cannot look at the numbers. He stares down at his impeccably shined shoes. You see, Barack, when thieves steal, they corrupt the entire society. Trump stands up slowly, circling around the resolute desk. You and your friends built a system that relies on thieves. You need them. You need the bureaucracy to be blind, so the money keeps flowing to your political allies. That is a conspiracy theory. It is not a theory. Vance slams his hand onto the glass table. It is a $16 million reality. Vance glares at the former president. These fraudsters just rinse and repeat. When things get hot in California, they flee from California to Nevada. There is a 7-fold increase of hospices in Nevada. They go to Arizona. They go to Texas. They pack up, they move, and they start billing the taxpayers all over again. Vance crosses his arms, looking like a judge ready to pass sentence on the entire bureaucratic apparatus. People ask me, why don't you throw them in jail? Just throw them in a cell. Vance shakes his head, a grim smile forming. But you and I both know how the system is built, don't we, Barack? When you try to put people in a cell, it takes years of careful investigations. You deal with the Department of Justice, the lawyers, the endless appeals. That is how your system protects its own. Vance steps closer to the sofa, towering over Obama. But you know what I can do right now? I can stop paying you. Vance points directly at the screen, at the sprawling web of fraud. When we tell several hundred hospices we no longer pay you, guess what they do? They shut their doors and they run away. We already delisted 450 hospices. That is an unbelievably large number. And guess what? In that first tranche, no one complained. No one calls us saying, no, 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 we were innocent. They know they got caught. They know the free ride ends. Trump stops pacing and stands right beside Vance, presenting a unified, impenetrable wall of strength. They know the hunters are here, and they know we refuse to stop until every single dime returns to the American people. Obama sinks back into the sofa, the weight of his collapsing legacy finally pressing the air out of his lungs. The trap is locked. The evidence is undeniable. The swamp bleeds out right here on the carpet of the Oval Office, and there is absolutely nothing the elites can do to stop it. The blue glow of the high-definition monitor abruptly snaps off. The sprawling digital web of medical fraud vanishes into the dark, but the stench of corruption lingers heavily in the air. Donald Trump tosses the remote onto the resolute desk. He does not need the screen anymore. He already proved the crime. Now it is time to expose the corrupt philosophy that allowed it to happen. The narrator steps up to the microphone, the tone shifting from investigative outrage to deep ideological clarity. This is where the rubber meets the road, America. The fraud we just discussed, that is no accident. That represents the inevitable result of a bloated, untouchable government apparatus. When you create a massive bureaucracy, you create a massive feeding ground for parasites. The political left loves the bureaucracy. They worship the administrative state because it functions as the engine of their power. It represents how they control you, how they tax you, and how they reward their loyal foot soldiers. But Trump was not elected to manage the decay. He was elected to bulldoze it. Trump sits down slowly, leaning back and resting his hands on the arms of the heavy leather chair. You saw the post, didn't you, Barack? Obama, still recovering from the brutal exposure of the Medicare files, feigns ignorance. I try not to subject myself to the daily manic episodes on your social media platforms. Oh, I think you saw this one. It made your entire base go absolutely bonkers. Someone made a beautiful image and put it up on Truth Social. Trump holds up his hand, painting the picture in the dim air of the Oval Office. It showed you bowing down to the Ayatollah. The caption said, "Traitors bow down." Obama's eyes flash with sudden, unmasked anger. the polite veneer completely shattered. It showed Joe Biden kneeling. Cowards kneel. And then it showed me giving the fist pump. Leaders lead. Trump drops his hand, staring directly into the eyes of the man who spent 8 years apologizing for American greatness. To me, it doesn't bother me a bit. It perfectly represents exactly how the people feel about the past Democrat presidents, and it represents how they feel about their current president as a leader. Obama stands up from the sofa, unable to remain seated under the sheer weight of the insult. That is cheap, populist garbage. Diplomacy is not bowing, Donald. It is statecraft. It is managing global stability. You govern by meme and impulse, treating the presidency like a reality television show. Trump does not flinch. I govern by results. Your version of statecraft managed the decline of this country. You managed our surrender, and you built a massive parasitic army of federal bureaucrats to enforce it. The narrator steps back in, leaning close to the mic. Listen to the difference, folks. Big difference. Nobody has ever seen anything quite like it. The left believes in the power of the state. They believe in the power of the alphabet agencies, the endless departments, the useless committees. But the America First movement believes in the power of the American worker. You want to talk about stability, Barack? Let's look at the numbers. The real numbers, not the fake statistics your friends in the media use to prop up Joe Biden. Trump points a finger like a loaded weapon. Over half of Biden's jobs were government jobs, and the half of the other half were foreign-born workers. He didn't build an economy. He built a welfare state and imported a new voting base to live in it. Obama crosses his arms, leaning against the back of the sofa, desperately trying to reclaim the intellectual high ground. The federal government operates as the backbone of civil society. Civil servants manage the infrastructure. They protect the environment. They administer the very health care programs you currently attack. If you dismantle the government apparatus, you plunge this country into absolute chaos. Chaos for who? Chaos for the lobbyists? Chaos for the diversity consultants? Chaos for the scammers billing us $66 million from an empty building in Ohio? Good. Let them have chaos. Trump stands up again, the sheer physical presence of the man dominating the room. I promised the American people I would shrink the government, not expand it, and I keep my campaign promise. We did it the hard way, but the correct way. Trump begins to pace, the energy in the room entirely under his command. We cut a lot of government jobs. We cut tremendous numbers of governmental jobs. I feel sorry for everyone. You know, it is a hard thing to do. Many of those people voted for me. But you cannot just hand out jobs because someone needs a desk to sit at. Trump stops pacing and locks eyes with his predecessor. We maintained government jobs where you had 10 people executing the job of one person. 10 people, Barack, sitting around passing paper back and forth, holding meetings about meetings, and bleeding the taxpayers dry. It is a tough thing, especially working here, because D.C. serves as the home of federal jobs. But you cannot make America great that way. The narrator interjects, the voice glowing with patriotic pride. Do you hear that? That represents the sound of the swamp draining. Not just talked about, drained. For decades, politicians arrived in Washington and promised to cut the fat, but they never did. Because the fat wrote their campaign checks. Trump actually did it. He took a chainsaw to the bureaucracy. Obama shakes his head, an expression of profound elitist horror on his face. You destroy the institutional memory of the republic. You fire dedicated professionals and replace them with nothing. The economy will collapse without federal regulation. Collapse? You haven't looked at the real world outside of your gated communities. Nearly 100% of the jobs created during my second term in office exist as private sector jobs. 100% of all new jobs. And 2 of the 3 new jobs originated in small businesses, not government agencies. Small businesses, the real engine of this country. Trump leans over the desk, delivering the final crushing blow to the socialist economic theory. Those government workers, we let go. Now they like me. Because they went out, they secured private sector jobs they like better, and it pays them sometimes 2 and 3 times more money. So it worked out the right way. America doesn't need 10 people executing the job of 1 person. We need people who actually create value. We need builders. We need producers. We do not need the bloated, lazy, corrupt system you kneel down to defend. Trump points to the historic portrait of George Washington on the wall, and then points back to Obama. Leaders lead. Barack, we ensure the American people find real jobs. We stand up while your people still try to figure out how to bow. Obama stands entirely defeated, stripped of his talking points, outmaneuvered by the undeniable, explosive reality of a booming private sector American machine. The ideological war in this room ends. The establishment loses. The narrator leans into the microphone, the voice dropping to a low, intense register. There is one thing the globalist elites hate even more than a strong, prosperous American working class. They absolutely despise a strong, unapologetic America on the world stage. For 8 long years, under the man sitting on that Oval Office sofa, the official foreign policy of the United States relied on appeasement. It featured an endless, humiliating apology tour. They sent billions of dollars in pallets of untraceable cash to the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. They bowed to dictators. They drew red lines they never enforced, and they managed the decline of American supremacy with a smug academic smile. They wanted America on her knees, begging for permission from corrupt international tribunals just to defend her own interests. But Donald Trump does not ask for permission. Inside the Oval Office, the domestic debate over healthcare fraud completely eviscerates Obama's legacy of so-called compassion. But Trump is not finished. He did not just bring the former president here to discuss Medicaid. He brought him here to display what actual, unadulterated American power looks like. Trump turns his back to Obama for a moment, walking over to the thick, bulletproof windows overlooking the South Lawn. The flashing police lights from the street settle into a rhythmic, pulsing glow against the glass. You know, Barack, taking out the trash in our own backyard represents just phase 1. Trump turns around, leaning his shoulder against the heavy window frame. The real problem with your administration wasn't just letting bureaucrats rob the taxpayers blind. It was that you broadcast our weakness to the entire planet. Obama bristles, immediately recognizing the shift in the battlefield. He feels comfortable defending the bloated administrative state, but his foreign policy record serves as a notoriously sensitive nerve. My foreign policy relied on coalition building and strategic patience. We de-escalated conflicts. We brought Iran to the negotiating table. We prevented a nuclear arms race in the Middle East through diplomacy, not reckless aggression. You brought them to the table? You bribed them, Barack. You sent them our money, and they used it to fund every proxy from Lebanon to Yemen. Trump steps away from the window, walking slowly back toward the resolute desk. But you don't have to worry about your negotiating partners in Tehran anymore. Trump stops, locking eyes with Obama, delivering the news with the cold, precise efficiency of a military strike. Because the Iran dynamic has entered a new phase. Iran is decimated. Obama's eyes widen slightly, the carefully maintained mask of indifference cracking right down the middle. They struggle to figure out who their leader is. Because I had the supreme leader neutralized. The declaration drops into the center of the Oval Office like a live shockwave. The silence that follows is absolute shock. For a fraction of a second, the former president looks physically struck. The architect of the infamous Iran nuclear deal, the man who staked his entire global reputation on appeasing the Ayatollah, suddenly faces the reality that his untouchable negotiating partner is wiped off the map. You did what? Then the horror morphs into pure, unchecked panic. Obama stands up abruptly, pacing frantically across the carpet. You completely lost your mind. You cannot unilaterally remove a foreign head of state. This violates international law. This violates the War Powers Act. Obama points a trembling finger at Trump. You drag this country into an uncontainable conflict, Donald. You plunge the entire Middle East into a catastrophic scenario. And you execute it without the permission of the United States Congress. The narrator steps right back in, the sarcasm dripping from every word. Do you hear the panic? Do you hear the absolute terror in his voice? He feels zero terror for the American people. He feels terrified because his entire worldview, the idea that you must beg the United Nations before protecting American interests, just shattered into a million pieces. The left screams about Congress. They screams about international law. But where was Congress when they dropped pallets of cash on a tarmac in the dead of night? Trump watches Obama panic, his expression completely calm, completely unbothered. He walks behind the resolute desk and sits down, projecting the ultimate image of control. Congress screams the exact same thing. Trump leans back, steepling his fingers. They run around the Capitol screaming, "This is war. You need our permission." But I calmly told them the truth. We haven't attacked anybody in over 3 weeks. Trump pauses, making sure Obama hears the next 5 words clearly. The operation is over, Barack. Obama stops pacing, staring at Trump as if trying to comprehend a foreign language. Over? You neutralize their leader? And you think they simply surrender? They will retaliate. They will close the Strait of Hormuz. They will choke off the global energy supply. They already tried to claim a propaganda win. Just on Monday, Iran announced 2 of their missiles struck a U.S. Navy frigate near the port of Jask. They claimed they forced our ship to flee. Obama seizes on the information, his eyes lighting up with desperate validation. Exactly. They fire on our vessels. You started a naval conflict. False. CENTCOM flatly denied it. No American ships suffered attacks or hits. Right now, Iran just pushes a bunch of bluster, claiming they win a war, when in reality, they just try to figure out who remains alive to negotiate with us. Trump leans forward, the casual demeanor vanishing, replaced by the intense focus of a wartime commander-in-chief. You think I left our ships exposed? You think I operate like your administration did in Benghazi? I opened a new front at sea. It is called Project Freedom. It operates as a large-scale mission to escort neutral and innocent commercial ships trapped in the Strait of Hormuz. Obama scoffs, shaking his head. Escorts. You put American sailors directly in the crosshairs of Iranian fast boats and anti-ship batteries. I framed it as a humanitarian mission. We deploy there to rescue vessels running low on food and supplies. Trump's eyes narrow, his voice turning into cold steel. But I issued a very clear warning to Tehran. Any interference gets dealt with forcefully. The narrator interrupts, leaning heavily into the microphone. This represents the genius of America First, folks. The left plays checkers, begging the world to like them. Trump plays 3-dimensional chess, and he plays it with loaded weapons. A humanitarian mission. You use the language of relief to mask a military blockade. I use the language they understand. Let me tell you what this humanitarian mission looks like, Barack. Trump starts listing the assets, each item dropping like a hammer blow on the desk. CENTCOM runs the mission. It involves missile-guided destroyers, more than 100 land and sea-based aircraft, drones, and 15,000 U.S. service members. Every single military asset in the region stands in place in case this becomes a hot conflict. Obama sinks back down onto the sofa, the realization of the massive tactical shift finally dawning on him. You dare them to shoot. I dare them to breathe. You see, Barack, you always played on their terms. You always let them take the offensive while you apologized. Trump points his finger at the former president, illustrating the greatest strategic pivot in modern history. By putting Project Freedom in place, I flipped the script. If Iran attacks now, it remains America at war on defense. Before, it was America at war on offense. If they fire one shot at a ship carrying food, they become the aggressors. They become the monsters, and we will wipe what remains of their regime off the map in the name of global security. Obama looks physically ill. The intricate, delicate web of appeasement he spent 8 years weaving suffers a violent tear, replaced by a wall of American steel. You gamble with the global economy. If the oil stops flowing through the strait, prices will skyrocket. It will crush the American consumer. Trump smiles. The smile of a man who already won the game before the opponent realized it was being played. The naval blockade stays in place for them, but under Project Freedom, we escort the commercial ships out. I try to get oil moving so that those oil prices can get moving downward. Trump leans back, folding his hands across his chest. And I told reporters today, there exists a very near future where American energy companies actually operate inside Iran, similar to how U.S. firms position themselves in Venezuela. The room falls completely silent. The magnitude of the victory is absolute. Trump did not just neutralize the threat. He took their leverage, he took their oil routes, and he forced them into submission without firing a single shot in 3 weeks. The narrator concludes the segment, the voice ringing with triumph. That is what leadership looks like. Traitors bow down, cowards kneel, but Donald Trump stands up, looks the enemy in the eye, and tells them exactly how it is going to be. And the swamp can only sit there and watch in silent, horrified awe. The heavy, suffocating tension inside the Oval Office finally breaks. It does not end with a soaring, eloquent speech from the former president. It does not end with a negotiated compromise or a bipartisan handshake for the cameras. It ends with a sudden, sharp crackle of static from a Secret Service radio out in the hallway. The muffled voice of an agent echoes through the heavy oak doors, confirming the perimeter stands secure. The Metropolitan Police cleared the scene on 15th Street. The threat neutralized, the lockdown officially lifted. Outside the thick bulletproof windows, the frantic red and blue strobes of the police cruisers finally switch off. The sudden absence of the flashing emergency lights leaves the Oval Office bathed in a pale, artificial glow. The light of the Washington, D.C. street lamps, an artificial dawn creeping over a city built on artificial promises, but inside this room, the artificiality suffers complete exposure. Barack Obama sits on the historic sofa for a long moment, staring at the floor. The master orator, the man who spent 8 years mesmerizing the global elite with his teleprompter poetry, has absolutely nothing left to say. His legacy of so-called compassion stands exposed as a $66 million slush fund for fake hospices. His foreign policy of appeasement stands completely dismantled by a show of raw, unapologetic American naval power. He looks exhausted. He looks like a man who just realized the history books will not be written by his friends in the mainstream media. Obama stands up slowly. He buttons his tailored suit jacket, a mechanical defensive gesture, trying to pull the shattered pieces of his dignity back together. He does not look at JD Vance. He does not look at the heavy black binder resting on the glass table. the binder holding the undeniable proof of his administration's catastrophic failures. He finally looks across the room, meeting the eyes of the man sitting behind the resolute desk. Donald Trump does not gloat. He does not smile. He simply watches the former president with the cold, immovable gaze of a builder who just finished tearing down a condemned property. "Good night, Barack. Tell Michelle I said hello." Obama's jaw tightens. He turns on his heel and walks toward the door. The heavy oak door clicks open, held by an unseen Secret Service agent, and then it clicks shut. The architect of the swamp walks out into the dimly lit hallway, disappearing into the shadows of political irrelevance. He leaves in total, humiliating silence. The narrator steps up to the microphone, the voice low, gritty, vibrating with absolute conviction. "Think about what just happened in that room, America. For a decade, they told you that you were the problem. They told you your desire for a secure border represented hatred. They told you your anger over your disappearing paycheck represented pure ignorance. They looked down their noses at you from their ivory towers, demanding you hand over your hard-earned money to fund their civilized society. But the civilized society proved to be a lie, an illusion designed to hide the thieves raiding the U.S. Treasury while you worked a double shift. But not anymore." Inside the Oval Office, Vice President JD Vance reaches down and picks up the heavy binder. He snaps it shut. The sound rings out like a loud crack in a quiet room. "They are already scrambling, Mr. President. We have reporters on the ground in California. Graceful Care hospice movers cleared out their office in the middle of the night." Trump stands up from the resolute desk, adjusting his red tie. "Of course they did. They know we track them. They think they can steal millions of dollars, pack up, and run in the night." Trump shakes his head, walking around the desk to stand shoulder to shoulder with his vice president. "But they forgot who is in charge now. They think they can run, but we already shut off the money spigot." Vance nods, tapping the cover of the binder. "We already delisted 450 hospices, and we just getting started. These people think they can cross state lines, go to Nevada, go to Arizona, and set up shop again. But my hunters track every single one of them down." Trump claps Vance firmly on the shoulder. "They will probably serve time in a federal cell. They will face their homes, their cars, all of their assets confiscated. You cannot rip off the American worker and expect to walk away." Trump looks toward the door. "All right, we kept the American people waiting long enough. Let's go talk to the people who actually build this country." Trump and Vance turn and walk out of the Oval Office, heading toward the East Room for the Small Business Summit. They head toward the real engine of America. They head toward the people who created nearly 100% of the jobs in this second term. The door closes behind them, leaving the Oval Office empty, silent, and finally cleansed of the bureaucratic rot. The narrator leans forward, speaking directly to you. The forgotten man. The forgotten woman. The lockdown ends. The storm broke. For years, the political establishment told you Washington operated as a swamp. They promised to drain it, but they only ever skimmed the surface, leaving the deepest, darkest mud completely untouched. But Donald Trump and JD Vance did not just bring a bucket to the swamp. They brought a flamethrower. They do not just drain it, they burn it to the ground with the undeniable, scorching heat of the truth. The era of the taxpayer-funded butler ends. The era of the $600 an hour ghost companion dies. The era of bowing to globalist dictators lies buried. But the war is not fully won yet. There are questions the mainstream media remains absolutely terrified to ask tonight. What happens to those 450 hospices that just faced delisting? Where are the doctors who sold their souls and their medical licenses to the highest bidder? Dr. Stephen Pine, The man whose number billed Medicare for $16 million. Where is he hiding right now? They know JD Vance's hunters are coming for them. They know the Department of War on Fraud refuses to accept a polite apology and a minor fine. Who sits next in the crosshairs? Which bloated government agency will have its doors kicked in tomorrow morning? Which corrupt politician will wake up in a cold sweat, realizing their invisible slush fund sits permanently frozen? The establishment faces absolute terror. They lose their grip, they lose their funding, and most importantly, they lose their ability to lie to you. You survived the nightmare of the previous economy. You survived the endless, suffocating mandates of the radical left. You kept your head down, you worked hard, and you kept this country running when the elites tried to tear it apart. And now, your champions stand in the building. The lights switch on, the receipts sit on the table, and the greatest reckoning in American political history officially begins. Keep your eyes open, America, because the hunters are just getting started. If the political establishment was willing to secretly burn $66 million on fake hospices just to fund their own corrupt power, what other multi-billion-dollar secrets are currently hiding in the dark, desperately waiting for the hunters to kick down the door?